we thought, why not? Pop into the centre, say a few words. Okay, so what did we say we'd talk about?
What is the real meaning of meditation?
Yeah, why bother? What's the point? Why bother? What are we trying to achieve? What's the point, you know? What's the point? Okay. But first I'm going to sing a little prayer to start. And it's just really saying, you know, if anybody in the room already identifies with being Buddhist, the first two lines are expressing our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings. And the second two lines can be for all of us. It's expressing like what we'd say is our purpose for being here together for the evening, an hour or so. We'll see how long we talk. Just thinking we're going to listen to these ideas coming from the Buddha about the mind, about happiness, about suffering, about the meaning of these things. And you know, so that we can see if there's any tools there, this is the point, to help develop actually what for the Buddha is our incredible potential, and we'll talk about this, for our sake, but because we live in this crazy world together, for the sake of others as well. Kind of thinking like that, you know. This little prayer in Tibetan expresses that idea. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chonyen gipe sonam ki drola penche sangye drupa shog. Well, you know, the Buddhist approach to get it right down to earth, to the very essence of what Buddha's saying, this person called Buddha, this person who lived a couple of, 2,500 years ago, what he's saying, what the point of it is, in other words, why a person would want to use Buddhism and all of it or any of it, well, the long term would be using all of it, is essentially his own personal findings from his own experience about the potential of human beings. Put it this way simply, really. So just to give a quick context, and I mentioned this lately, we all know he's an Indian, and we know that before that there was this amazing culture in India. I mean, usually ourselves in our Western culture, our Jewish, religious, Catholic culture, our European culture, I think we don't know anything about Indians, anything about India, unless of course we're Indian. But we pay attention to the Greeks and the Romans and all that lot, isn't it, back in our own culture. But when you really think about where Buddha, the culture that Buddha came out of, it really gives you an insight into how remarkable actually these people were, and therefore the point of what Buddha's saying. So I would say without any doubt that the mind, our consciousness, our mind, what goes on in our mind, that's what Buddhism is about. That's his expertise. Now, if we say that these days what we think is a neuroscientist, because that's what we think. Like, for example, this Buddha, the model of the mind that the Buddhism uses, and if you are a serious Buddhist, that you'd really study in depth as the basis for working with your mind, because that's for the Buddha where all the potential is, which we're going to describe. This information is very fascinating. If we talk about neuroscience now, we know very well a person has a microscope and they look through a microscope at a physical thing called the brain. That's what the science is about these days. So but what's fascinating about the Buddha and the people, these amazing Indians before him, hundreds of years before him, this extraordinary culture that was already existing there, that's where meditation started. They developed, these incredible beings developed this amazing technique that's known in the world very roughly these days, that it's the source of what the world knows as mindfulness meditation. And there are lots of different interpretations of it, okay? But this technique that these Indians cultivated, these amazing beings before the Buddha, hundreds of years before him, which was the rich philosophical tradition he came out of, they actually developed this extraordinary technique, which is still a central technique for the Buddha, because when he came along, he went through that system and then he diverged in his own direction, which is how come now there is what's called Buddhism. But what they did, they developed this technique that's actually a skill of the mind, a psychological skill, and simply speaking, it's the skill to develop incredible, subtle concentration. Now, when you think the ordinary word concentration, that doesn't sound very like what we mean by spiritual, does it? Well, that's the point. This technique is a skill that's absolutely astonishing, that gets you to get, on the basis of real discipline and practice, much intense practice, this skill enables you to literally go beyond the grosser level of all your crazy thoughts and your sensory consciousness. And let's face it, that's all we posit as existing in our culture, to literally go beyond that, to access these more subtle levels of your own mind. Now, this is where it sounds cosmic to us, because this is a level of mind that we don't even posit as existing in our materialist models of the mind. You won't see these aspects of mind when you study the brain. That's why immediately we hear something like that, we think, oh, wow, that's religion, that's mystical, blah, blah, blah. But this is the whole point that these Indians come up with, and Buddha himself, that their view of the mind is radically different. And it's from, not just some speculation, not from using a microscope, not just from revelation from a creator. The Buddha doesn't have a view like that. It's coming from his own internal experience on the basis of this incredible technique that enables you to still the mind to such a subtle degree to literally go beyond the grosser level. And that, again, like I said, that's mystical to us because we don't posit anything existing like that. But this is the thing. And in there, they don't just space out. What they also did was literally these people before him and then the Buddha, they mapped the mind. The way the mind works, according to the Buddha, is coming from their own internal observation. Like they developed the internal microscope, if you like. Now, this sounds cosmic to us because we don't talk like that in our psychology. It just sounds mystical. But don't hear it as mystical, really. If you read some of the characteristics that you would develop if you attained even some level of this concentration, it would blow your mind. I mean, it's just quite astonishing. But this is not known in our culture, because it's not part of our religions, and it's not part of our psychology, and it's certainly not part of our philosophy. But it's really important we know this if we want to try and comprehend what Buddha's on about, And the biggest point of all that we've got to kind of be clear in principle is he's not a creator, and he doesn't posit a creator. I mean, look at this place and hear me. I'm a nun. I sang a prayer, all the holy things. It looks exactly the same as any religion. And it's got these aspects. But there's Buddhism, there's no concept of a creator. And there's no concept, and he is certainly not one. So then this information that's called Buddhism, it's come from his experience. That's the crucial point to get. Now, he's not asking us also to believe a single word he tells us. This is a really important point in Buddhism. He's saying, this is what I found to be so. This is my experience. This is what I found that everyone can cultivate. And he said he achieved this himself. Here's my methodology. Okay, honey, over to you. That's really the approach. Just like if you hear about anyone who's discovered something, like Einstein came to some conclusion called relativity. Well, he doesn't want you to believe him. He's not going to shove it down your throat. It's not a dream or a mysticism, or he didn't have a revelation of it. He worked really hard and he observed this. And he says, over to you, here's the methodology, up to you now to experience the same thing. That's really the approach in Buddhism. So essentially, Buddha, this word Buddha, it's interesting in Sanskrit. The Tibetan equivalent is very interesting. The Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, the etymology, the meaning of it's really tasty. This first syllable, sang, implies the complete eradication from our own mind, our own consciousness, to the subtlest degree of all nonsense, all ego, all fears, all attachment, all anger, all jealousy, all depression, all the stuff that we totally take for granted as completely normal and that our psychological models would assume are completely normal. So normal that if you didn't have them, you'd be called weird. But this is Buddha's deal, the first one. And again, this sounds mystical, like impossible. But this is his finding from his own experience, that this stuff in us is not at the core of our being. And all these practices that a person would learn to do as a Buddhist, if you take it on board seriously, eventually this is where it leads, to rid the mind utterly of all the nonsense, all the rubbish. And the second syllable, even more, gye, that implies the development of all the good stuff. Love, intelligence, compassion, kindness, generosity, courage, all these words we know are the nice stuff. He says that stuff is at the core of our being. And we can develop that to perfection. So making it really simple, the essence of being a Buddhist then, is to know your own mind, to work on your mind, to know your mind, to develop these skills, but crucially to understand, if a person chooses to, the Buddhist way of understanding these states of mind. And forget whether you achieve the long term. I mean, don't hold your breath. He says it'll take several lifetimes. Forget that one. But even just the meaning of it, the implication of it is really very powerful for us. Because if we look into how we feel every day, and when we get depressed, when we get jealous, when something goes wrong, when the boyfriend leaves us, when we get sick, I mean, the panic in us is really unbearable because we really believe the despair, the depression, the anger, the hurt, the jealousy, this stuff that we know so well, ordinary stuff, forget about serious, more serious unhappiness. We just assume this is just the way human beings are, what to do. What can I do about it? Can't change it, you know? So we tend to assume this stuff is like at the core of my being. This is who I am, you know. I'm just a depressed kind of person. I just get jealous. I get angry. What to do? What to do? We're very fatalistic about it. Well, all Buddha's saying is, no, honey, there's no reason to be. Yes, it's horrible. Yes, we don't like it. But we can change. That's really the essence of why you'd bother even looking into Buddhism, why you'd even bother doing, according to Buddha, what's called meditation. So it's not a short-term thing, but one of our biggest misconceptions, I would suggest, in our culture, in the West, for why you'd meditate. First of all, we wait till something gets really serious. So it's a bit like, you know, you're driving on 100 miles an hour on the freeway, on the motorway, and that you discover your wheels are coming off. Well, oh, what am I going to do? My wheels are falling off. Well, it's a bit late to ask, isn't it? If you had a bit of maintenance, you could have avoided the problem. And that's the point. So you don't go to the mechanic when the wheels are falling off. You go well before to ensure the wheels are in good nick and the car's in good nick so you won't have a collapse. Well, that's our problem. We wait till the anger comes. We wait till you want to practically kill your boyfriend. We wait till the disaster happens. We wait till you can't get out of bed one morning because you're so depressed. Oh, I better do something about it. Or what can I do desperately? It's a bit late, you know. It's not too late. Nothing's ever too late. But that's our tendency to think of something like meditation, you know, as like an alternative to a pill. You only do it when things are really bad. Well, you don't go to the mechanic only when the wheels are falling off. We have maintenance, you know, and we have maintenance for our houses, for our bodies, for everything, but we don't have maintenance for our minds, I would suggest, you know. And I think there are various logical reasons why in our culture we don't. So one of them, and this is really one of Buddha's deals, you know, when you study Buddhism, you go into this a bit deeper. His deal is very simple. He's basically saying, if we look into the way we are now, that's what he means by samsara. It's not some kind of place where you're allowed to have sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you know, where you have to give it up for boring old nirvana, not like that. This is a state of mind. It's the way we are. It's an assumption deep in our bones that happiness and suffering come from out there. It's really simple, you know. And he's basically saying, yeah, there's not totally wrong. You know, if my boyfriend is kind to me, then very reasonable to say you're happy. And if my boyfriend cheats on me, very reasonable to say you're not. But he says it's not the only issue isn't what your boyfriend does. Basically, he says what goes on in here, finally, is the real thing. And he means this quite literally. Okay, so in Buddhism, if you take the big picture point of view, you can go back into, you know, the bigger picture of karma and all that stuff. We mightn't even go there tonight. It doesn't matter. But you don't even need to think about that stuff to hear this practical point. Basically what Buddha says is, yes, bad things happen. And yes, indeed, good things happen. But he says we make the mistake of believing they are the cause of whether I'm happy or suffering. And because of that, that's we grasp frantically at the nice things and we dread and try to resist the bad things because we focus all our energy externally. He's essentially saying this pretty much, you know. And all he's saying is, well, I've got some methods for you people where you can start to do a bit of internal. And when you really start to know your own mind and understand this jealousy, understand the workings of it, and that's what they deal with in Buddhist psychology, it's quite precise the way they deal with this stuff, that we can learn to change this stuff. So it's not a moralistic issue. It's not like, oh, you should change the inside, don't try to change your boyfriend. He says, there's a saying in Buddhism, hey, if you can change something, please change it. But the point is, what if you can't? That's when the work starts, you know. So all Buddhism really is saying is that he has methods to help us know in more depth, more clearly, the workings of our own self, the workings of our mind. It is not a mystical thing. It's a really powerful thing that we need to learn to practice, to want to do, to unpack and unravel the contents of our own mind so we can start to feel we have more control over it, more power to change this. Change the outside world too. Great, that's a bonus. But we know from our lives we can't control that. We know from our lives, no matter how perfect everything is, next day some disaster will happen. We cannot guarantee it can't. We can't control those things. No matter how hard we try, we can't. That's clear to us. That's evidence. So all he says is, well, then, you know, work on your mind more. So in other words, if he's saying, if we think practically, if we spent our lives since we were little really understanding that what goes on in here is really the main player. I mean, seriously, that's the real point that Buddha's making. or even not even the most important one, even if you think it's an important one, that is already incredible. And can you imagine, since we're little, if we were given methods to pay attention to this, to understand the chaos that's going on in here, to have some courage to know that we can work with this, and not just buy into the external stuff. Can you imagine how we'd be by the time we're 20? We'd be amazing human beings dealing with the dramas when they come. But part of our problem is, if you're an angry type person, then this is my style. In your life, when things go wrong, you punch people in the nose, you shout, you yell and kick and scream. We know that one. Well, I thought that was just the way what life was, I thought anger was my middle name. If somebody said to me, work on your anger, I think that's stupid. Now, another kind of person, more like some of you people maybe, you're more depressed internal type person. You don't respond negatively, but it all goes inside. Because one of the key ways Buddhism talks about the mind is, even though 99% of the day we're not conscious of what's going on, we know that because we can't remember 99% of the day. But we've been processing all day. Even in Western psychology, they say there's like 1,000 thoughts a second, Buddhism agrees. But we're not paying attention to it. So much stuff happens in one day, in an ordinary life. Just a whole bunch of things, but we just don't pay attention, meaning we don't pay attention to our responses. So we're building up lots of stuff all day. And Buddha's deal is there's nothing that we experience that goes astray. It's all stored in there. It's all stored. So all he's saying is that we can learn to pay more attention to it. You don't wait till you can't get out of bed one morning before you start realizing you're depressed, and you don't wait till you want to kill your boyfriend before you start realizing you're getting angry. But we wait till it's too late, like the wheels falling off. That's the big problem. And that's why it all seems so severe and extreme to us, because we don't have maintenance. It's not a mystical thing, I promise you. But the first step has to be even this recognition. Okay, that sounds an interesting idea. Pay attention to what's going on in my own head. Okay, give it a go. You understand? That's the real point. So why is that difficult though? Because when I'm mad at my boyfriend, everything in my being believes I'm angry because he did that. And if someone suggests when you're in the midst of that pain, because he's cheated on you, that, Robina, you can be less angry and less jealous, you can work on it, you'd think, excuse me, why should I? I'm allowed to be jealous. He is the problem. That's one of our biggest problems for why we don't even attempt to look in here, because when we're in the midst of the pain, we believe 1,000,000% that what does go out there is the main cause. When you're in the midst of it, when we're quiet, we can hear the theory. We know we can change our minds when things aren't too dramatic. But when it's really serious, it's very hard to have any sense that you should work on your mind for your own sake, not for any moralistic reason, but for your own benefit, This is the part that's hard to hear. This is one of the reasons why we wait till it's too late. And then we're frantic, So we can just really buy into the idea and give it a go. Buddha's not saying believe him, test it. And the fact of the matter is we do this every day. We change our thoughts, which is all he's talking about. We change our feelings and thoughts every day. We change our mind every day. Let's say you're mad at your sister, but you don't want to fight. You're going to have a family dinner, you don't want to fight. So you think it through and you decide you'll let go of it. That's exactly what Buddha says is called practice. Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He just happens to run with it. That's all, has really good skills with it. That's all. We do this all the time. It's something mystical. Don't think it is. See, some of the other misconceptions, like one misconception I'd say first of all, about meditation, is that it's an alternative to a pill, which means you do it when it's really serious and you can't bear the pain, so you've got to make it all go away. This is a really, really big misconception. This is not the point at all. It's like if you've got cancer, but the pain is terrible. Please take your painkiller, but don't fool yourself now because you don't have cancer. You've got to deal with the real problem. But we want to make it all go away. We can't cope sometimes. That's reasonable. Use whatever techniques you can to. But the point is, by the pain disappearing doesn't mean the cancer's fixed. So the feeling of the pain disappearing, and it can indeed, if you do a nice little meditation, 5 minutes watching your breath, maybe you might calm your mind down. Nothing wrong. It's fantastic. We need to do this. But don't misconceive it as now you fix the problem. All the thoughts have gone away. No, it's not at all. First point. The other one is we often think of meditation, and there are many kinds, and anybody can make up their own. Again, Buddha doesn't own the word meditation. It happens to be a particular word they use in Buddhism, and they've got very specific approaches to it, which I'll talk about. But anyone can make up their own. No one owns it. He hasn't got like a copyright on it, you know. So you can make up your own. You can call it what you like. But if you want to understand Buddhist meditation, it's quite precise. And we'll go into it, okay. But the point is, we think of meditation often as an alternative, as like a relaxation technique. And it actually, there's a particular meditation, this one that I mentioned these amazing Hindus invented hundreds of years before the Buddha. They call it, it's a technique to develop single-pointed concentration. Well, this is a level of focus and concentration, like I'm already indicating, that we don't even have anything remotely like in our culture, because when you've got it, you've gone beyond the grosser level. You've gone beyond the gross level to this subtler level of your own mind. And that's a pretty intense thing. People spend years in meditation retreat getting this and the immense benefits of this. And this is just the beginning. It's not as if that's the result. You've honed your mind to this incredible degree. So in Buddhism, that's for a purpose to accomplish the goal in the second mode of meditation. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But in general, this concentration meditation, which is the one that they invented, which is a central technique in Buddhism, which is our fiercely disciplined, it demands fierce discipline and courage and focus and lots of hard work to get the mind to stop all the berserk thoughts in a very coherent way. But this is often considered to be like a relaxation technique. But itself, it's like the opposite of relaxation. So there are lots of relaxation techniques. Yoga has amazing relaxation techniques. We need relaxing, please. We need it badly. But don't misconceive this particular technique, this Buddhist technique that mindfulness is based on. Don't misunderstand it as a relaxation technique. It absolutely is not, and I'll describe why, okay? So understanding the Buddhist approach, this particular one called single-pointedness, it's a crucial tool to cultivate so that we can do this job, as Lama Yeshe puts it, which is the real job of being a Buddhist, to change your mind, to be the job of being your own therapist. I mean, it sounds like cute and it sounds like good marketing. It is good marketing, but it's really correct. So the classic approach to meditation then in Buddhism, there are two main techniques, okay? One is this concentration, and that indeed from its own, the benefits of this just itself are pretty incredible. You'd have effortless control over your thoughts. That's a pretty stunning concept. You'd have what they call clairvoyance. This is mystical. Of course it is in our culture. Nothing is posited like this, but this is based on Buddha's view of the mind, not just being at the level of the conceptual and the brain function. Way more subtle than that. There's these levels of mind way more subtle that these techniques enable you to access, okay? So there's extraordinary qualities. Your mind would be blissful, you'd be clear, have effortless control over all your thoughts, you'd be joyful, your body would feel like a feather. Really very many astonishing results of even getting some semblance of this concentration. It's described in terms of 9 stages in the text, you know. And even, we're discussing the 9th, but even if you get to the 3rd, you'd be pretty amazing. But the key point about using this in our daily life, okay, if you were serious in doing this as a Buddhist, you'd give up sex, drugs and rock and roll, and you go to the mountains, okay, for several years to get this 9 stages of single-pointedness. That's long term. 99% of us won't do that. But if we're going to use this technique in our daily life, the goal of it is to focus. The goal of it is to focus. The goal is not to relax. The goal is not to make the thoughts go away. The goal is not to make the pain go away. The goal is to focus the mind, to train your mind to stay on one thing, which of course is absolutely not what our mind wants and not what it's used to. It runs gone berserk all day, we know that. So it's a fiercely difficult technique and it demands a lot of rigor and a lot of discipline. So, you know, they say even in the texts, one of the signs of success in even the first of the 9 of these stages is that you think your mind's getting more berserk. And why is that? It's like you now, because you're learning to focus your mind, you learn to focus on one thing, like for example the breath. There's many different things you can learn to focus on. It's a really practical technique. Don't think of it as religious, you know. I mean, I always joke and say a communist could do it, and I'm not, and it's true. It's not any belief about it. There's no holy stuff about it. It's a very fierce technique to help you focus your mind. Anybody needs it, you know. So the goal is to simply focus on one thing. That means you're fighting mightily not to rush off with all the crazy thoughts, isn't it? Which is our tendency. So you all the time, you know, because you notice your mind wanders off. You bring it back. You're watching like a hawk. You bring it back to the focus. So what's happening is really naturally, because you're sitting there quietly, not busily involved in your daily life, then you can only, you're focusing on the breath, let's say, but you can't help but notice all the crazy thoughts. Well, of course, they're all there anyway. You see, the difference is when you're running around your daily life, doing the dishes, getting here, driving the car, going there, talking to the kids, doing this, what that, go to shopping, the fact is, all these thoughts are still there. We know they're underneath, like you know, wherever the local, I mean, we said this last time, the local football, what is it? Who are you people up here? What's your team?
Leeds.
Who?
Leeds.
Oh, Leeds, there you go. So how many people fit in the league? What do you call the football place? What do you call it?
Ellen Road.
Who?
Ellen Road.
Ellen Road.
Ellen Road.
Ellen who?
Allen's Road.
Allen's Road is the name of the, what do you call it?
Football stadium.
It's like we call it the football field, whatever it is they call it in Australia, you know. So anyway, the football stadium, listen to this. If you're a couple of miles away from it, and there's a busy Saturday, I don't know, 50,000 people, 40,000 people, you know you'll hear this gigantic roar, won't you? And you go, it must be footy today, as we say in Australia, it must be footy, you know. We call it footy. There must be football on today. And you know very well that roar is 50,000 individual voices all shouting. Do we agree? Well, that's our mind, isn't it? Right there, it's underneath this quiet roar. We know this all the time, but we never pay attention. Do we agree with this? You never pay attention, but you know it's always there, all the thoughts chatting away endlessly. But because you're busy driving, busy doing your cooking, busy doing your job, you're not noticing it so much because the external world is distracting you, isn't it? But when you're sitting there quietly attempting to watch your boring old breath, you can't help but hear this roar, these crazy voices all there. And naturally you think you're getting worse. But honey, they've been there all the time. We just don't pay attention. It's a bit like if you're trying to get to sleep and you can't get to sleep. We all know that experience, and you lie there for 2 hours going crazy, right? And you're at that point, because you're not distracted by doing the dishes or driving the car, and you're not even trying to concentrate, you are totally absorbed, right? Isn't it, for 2 hours, like this? Totally absorbed in this chaotic thought processes. Do we agree with that? Because we're not even trying to concentrate then, and we're not distracting ourselves. But this stuff is happening all the time. You see, the Buddha's view, and they go into this in great depth in the literature, like I said before, everything we've ever, even forget past lives, okay? Even this life, we come from the second since we're tiny, there's just this endless stuff, and everything we've ever done, thought, said, and heard, and thought about since we're born is stored away in our mind. And much of it is unprocessed. We just respond to things. You get afraid when you're a kid. You see the dog, you burst into tears. You get angry, you get jealous. You don't process with it. It passes away after a while. But it's all gone in there. It's all going in there, and we don't deal with it. We don't deal with 99.9% of what is going on in our mind. It's all stored away in there. This is the Buddhist approach, and it seems pretty reasonable. So naturally, when you're trying to get to sleep, you go crazy because these uncontrolled berserk thoughts stored away. Or if you're trying to meditate, watching the breath, then you really notice because you're trying to stop following all this crazy stuff. And then, of course, in daily life, you're just distracted by the outside stuff. So what happens is, we know it's all there. We don't know what to do with it. We assume, well, this is just normal, berserk, because we never paid attention. So it's like when one of those 50,000 voices shouts louder than the others, that's when you start to hear, and that's when it starts to come to the surface. One of them will start to grow. The depression will become so strong, the anger, the jealousy, and then this is just this uncontrolled stuff in there. Well, the Buddha's deal, okay, don't hold your breath. It's going to take a long time. His whole point is we have the capacity in the long term to have effortless, unbelievable control over this. And he would not only say that, but as I've indicated by the word Buddha, long term we can actually rid the mind of this stuff totally. Now initially that seems cosmic. Don't worry about that here. If a person's interested in Buddhism, you'd study what he means by this and listen to his reasonings. Don't just believe it as some weird trip, But at least for me, the main point to get from this is that some kind of confidence that these are our thoughts, this is our mind, and I can do something about it. But you have to want to do something about it, not just want to kill your boyfriend, not just want to blame your boyfriend. And that's the hard part. I'm not being mean about us. We all know this, Why should I work on my mind? He should change, we will say. And this is one of our worst tragedies. Because the fact is, we know the jealousy is painful. We know the depression is painful. We know it's painful. But we somehow have this bizarre idea, Buddha's suggesting, that I really believe it's like the boyfriend injected anger and jealousy into me, and he did it. It's his fault. And we believe that in our bones. So to have the courage that even though he is a creep, yes, what can I do about me? And this does take courage. It's not moralistic. This is a really big point. It's for our own benefit, and that we often don't think about. When we're so caught up in the unhappy emotions and so caught up in the rage and the hurt and the victim mind, which is the irony of ego, there's no thought that we can change it. That just seems like a joke, but we don't even think we should, because it's not my fault. This is the terrible irony of ego. It's this, Lama Yeshe would call ego the self-pity me, you know. It's heartbreaking. So to get to the point where we have the courage, don't hear it as moralistic. Don't hear it as victim or blame or guilt or I'm bad and it's my fault. Don't hear it like that. Hear it as practical. Practical. I mean, I know Lama Zopa said recently, and it kind of sounds shocking, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Because we're so caught up with the outside world and blaming the boyfriend for making you miserable because he cheats on you or whatever, or doesn't put the seat down in the toilet. I hear everywhere, all over the world, I hear that women get furious with the men for not putting the toilet seat down. Is that true in Leeds? So whatever it is, big or small, you know, just the Buddha's point, the Buddha's deal is, you know, we have the possibility by becoming familiar with our mind to unpack and unravel it and actually begin to kind of reconfigure. And it's the key to understanding this, and this is where we get quite specific in Buddhist psychology, and we won't, and this is really important to understand, you know. See, like the wheels falling off, that's when the emotion has hit. When you can't get out of bed one morning, you're completely inert with depression. When you want to kill the boyfriend because the rage or the jealousy or the pain is so intense. It's a bit late to now say, what can I do? Never too late, but it's a bit late. The best is damage control. You know, hope you don't crash into them, you know, and die. Hope you don't kill your boyfriend. Hope you can get out of bed one morning. But the point is, if we can really just comprehend that when the emotional component comes, that's like the voices, the screaming 50,000 voices at Allen's Road, and the one is even louder, that's when the anger comes to the surface. And that's the point we notice only when it gets to the really emotional level. Because we pay a big attention to emotions, to feelings, you know. But the point in Buddhist psychology, and this is initially quite fascinating, initially seems counterintuitive, that all these emotions, this is meaning when we feel it in our body, we make the body the boss, Lama Yeshe says. You know, we don't pay attention to what goes on in our mind until it hits our body, until it's emotional. But what all he's saying is, all these millions of voices down, deep down, deep down, deep down, that have been processing all our lifetimes, or this lifetime, good enough. When we start with concentration meditation, and you begin to get some focus, which means you are beginning to get some control over your power to stay on the one thing. You haven't stopped all the thoughts and don't even bother trying. You don't want to, in a sense, because you need to become familiar with those 50,000 voices, because they're the chaos. They're the stuff that are causing the problem. That's why you don't want to just all go away. You want to be able to become familiar with those. And this is the point. Once you get some focus, and that takes courage, not to follow every crazy thought, just to stay focused. You can't help but notice all the crazy thoughts there, but don't be scared of it, because as you get more control every day, practicing, then what you're going to notice is that you're going to notice beneath the emotional component, you're going to start to hear all those crazy thoughts more clearly. And this is where they literally do exist at the level of conceptual stories. You know, if you see a person angry, you just see a person who's shouting, yelling, eyes wide like saucers, mouth open, spit coming out, tears coming out the eyes, and crazy irrational words coming out of their mouth, right? Oh, she must be angry, we'll say. Well, that's from years and years, and Buddha would say lifetimes, of having these conceptual stories in the mind that are the thoughts of anger, we're going to unpack them and talk about it, that eventually explode through the body into this massive emotion. So what I'm trying to get at is all these emotional components, whether it's the deep depression, the anger, the jealousy, at the emotional level, where it hits the body, feel it in the body, if we start to get some focus, we'll start to listen more deeply. We want to listen to these thoughts, not make them all go away, please. Because we have to unpack and unravel them, because they're the problem. So that needs courage. As one of my therapist friends says, if you don't like rude words, close your ears. Doing this job is having your hands in your own shit. It's not joking. Anybody who's even done any therapy, it's not comfortable to start looking into yourself, is it? It's painful, you know. But this is the stuff, this is the real job of being a Buddhist, is beginning to become familiar with what's in here and to own it as yours. This is the key point. Not with guilt, not with shame, not with blame, but it's a revelation. This is my jealousy. This is my anger. And when I can get past the emotional component, I can begin to hear the crazy stories that anger is speaking. And it's a conceptual story. Buddha says our minds are full of these ridiculous conceptual stories. And sort of the voices of ego, the jealous voices, the angry ones, the depressed ones, the low self-esteem ones, they're all distorted stories. Love and compassion are also conceptual stories. And they also bring emotion, but they're valid. The Buddha says they're reasonable states of mind. That means, you know, I love my boyfriend. I want him to be happy. I have compassion for him. He's got a headache. That's empathy. They're valid thoughts. They're valid emotions because they're connected to others and they're reasonable. They're kind of in sync with reality. But the poor old delusions, the poor old disturbing emotions, they're like wacko, you know. They've got no relationship to reality at all. And they're totally panic-stricken, I-based. They're the source of the pain, Buddha says. So the reason to want to look at them isn't because you're a naughty person. He says this is what the practice is. Because guess who will benefit? You. So there's this nice analogy. The words I said before, Sangye, Buddha. The first job is ridding all the rubbish, getting rid of all the rubbish. The second job is growing all the goodness. Well, that's the two wings of the bird. A bird needs two wings, compassion, wisdom and compassion. So the compassion wing's more advanced. It's based upon doing the work on yourself, working with your own mind, owning responsibility for what's in there, including the good stuff. Ego loves the bad stuff. Oh, you're a nice person, Robina. No, I'm not. 27 people can tell you you're a nice person. You don't believe it. You hope they say it again, but we don't believe it. One person indicates you might not be so nice and you believe it instantaneously, which proves the irony of ego. We're obsessed with our negativity. It's kind of bizarre. So becoming familiar with all these 50,000, not to mention 50,000 more, underneath, running like this, underneath this current, never stopping. We have to become familiar with that stuff. And that's pretty intense, because who wants to? We can't bear it. But we shouldn't be afraid of it, because there's nothing set in stone. It's my mind, they're my thoughts. And this stuff, don't hold your breath, this takes time, you know. It's not an easy job, but it's a doable job. And when we start to have the confidence and courage to, as you keep living your life, instead of blaming the boss and blaming the person in the next door neighbour, blaming everybody else. And indeed, we also blame for the good things. Why are you unhappy, Robina? My boyfriend's horrible. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, my boyfriend's kind. So we blame him for making me happy as well, which is the business that Buddha says. We make the outside stuff the cause of what I feel here. Buddha honestly is almost saying the opposite. What goes on in here informs the way we experience the outside stuff. This is why you meditate. This is why you want to practice. And meditate also is very fascinating. Don't, you know, there's a common cliche again, if you don't meditate, don't close your eyes and cross your fingers or cross your legs or something, you're not a Buddhist, you know. Well, I mean, all I know is I wouldn't be a Buddhist if that's the case. When I first heard this stuff, I thought the idea of sitting down with my legs crossed and my eyes closed was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. I had no interest in it. You've got to know where you're at, you know, what you need. But I liked the idea of becoming familiar with my own mind. That I liked. Always liked that in Buddhism. So, you know, you've got to do the practice and the style and use the methods that work for you, you know. There's so many techniques, but we get so cliched about it. Is that a stretch or a...
It helps my mind.
Well, good, darling. I'm very happy.
To listen to you.
Okay, good. Okay, so far so good. Are we communicating, you people?
Wonderful.
I think you better ask me some questions now. We'll just see where we go with all this. Ask me some questions, come on. Any old question, doesn't matter. Well, let me tell you a story first. I'm sure when I was here last, if you were here, you might have heard it. But this is what, hearing all this, and this is, the essence of being a Buddhist, the stuff I'm talking about, this is the essence of it, becoming familiar with your own mind and learning to change it. Because why? This is the wisdom wing. It's for your sake. Then on the basis of this, you can start to be useful to others, So don't be apologetic about doing something for your own sake. One of our biggest problems with spiritual, you think, oh, that sounds selfish. It's intelligent selfishness. You've got to put yourself together first, understand your own mind. Then you can understand someone else. Because we're all kind of recipes. It's a different recipe of the same rubbish. So that's why, for me, I found it very powerful over these last 20 plus years working with people in prison. Because, as the Buddha said, if you can change something, please change it. But they can't. They don't have the luxury of moving out of that cell from that maniac. They don't have the luxury, my friends on death row, to even get the hell out of prison ever. They don't have the luxury. So if you can't change that, then what choice do you have? And that's why many of the people I know in America, Australia, not so many, it never seemed to develop, our project anyway, never really developed here, is when the people I know in prison, really work on their minds because they get it, because they don't have the luxury to change the external. And the thing is, though, it's kind of ironic. We might as well be in prison. Look how we are so paralysed by our relationships. You go back like a moth to a flame to the same crummy relationship. You go back like a moth to a flame, the same crummy job. Because we're full of fears, I shouldn't change, I'm supposed to get divorced, that people will worry, people will criticise me, I can't do it, I won't find another job. So we become miserable. So not only do we not even realise we could change the job, we don't even realise we can change our mind, so we live in hell. My friends in prison who practice, they know they can't change their backs are against the wall, so they can change their minds. But we always have this fantasy, I know he's an alcoholic, but maybe he'll change. Or he cheats on me, but he really does love me. Because attachment wants him to change. We live in a fantasy, Or hoping the boss will start thinking you're a nice person. So we just live in misery. Live in misery. Don't change our mind and don't change the job. That's how we mostly live our lives. So we live in hell, paralysed, not realising we can change anything. But we in fact have the luxury to change the job any time. Actually. But the trouble is we think we can't. So full of fears and insecurity and what people think. So my friends in prison are, for me, such a good example. I always quote this story. I might have said it when I was here last, but I'll tell you again. This woman, I saw a thing on the BBC recently about her. This woman was on death row in America, in Florida. It was like 30 plus years ago. It was arrested with a husband. There's 3 hippie kids. They were hippies, 3 hippie kids. And they were arrested. They were picked up by 2 blokes, I think, in a car. And the blokes were stopped by the police. The blokes killed the police and blamed the hippies. So they're on death row. I mean, you can't conceive of the nightmare, actually. He was even executed. I mean, you can't imagine the pain. I mean, we go crazy when just some person accuses us of breaking the cup we didn't break. Obsessed with what the person at work thinks about us. We're so overwhelmed by the tiniest things. We know this. Can you imagine that nightmare? And she said, I read just bits of her memoir, I think she did yoga and things in prison. And she was an amazing, unbelievable person, such courage. She said, at some point I realised I couldn't change anything, but they couldn't take my mind from me. So I decided, I'm not a prisoner, I'm a monk. I'm not in a cell, I'm in a cave. I mean, it's so moving to hear this. If you think it through, it's outrageous, And so marvellous. She eventually got out after 17 years. And then I remember reading somewhere, and then I saw this podcast saw it. It was visual. Yeah, I saw it on the BBC. She went to Ireland one year after she got out. The kids were given away. Husband had been executed. She got out after 17 years, proved her innocence. And she was in a conference in Ireland, and she met at this Amnesty International conference. And she met an Irish fellow who'd been in the IRA, who was also accused of killing 2 police, who was also innocent, and who also did yoga and also got out. And now they're living together in the south of Ireland, running courses for prisoners who've been wrongly accused. Have you read about them?
Radio 4.
That's it, right? There you one. That's the one. That's the one. These 2 lovely, they're old now with white hair and pink faces and podgy, fat old people, beautiful human beings. I mean, the suffering of their lives, But the methods they use. He said he started to do his own legal representation, and he was in the library trying to study. He said his anger was so shocking he could not possibly concentrate. And this is the tragedy now. Most people never get past that. Do you understand? But he heard about yoga. He actually decided he had to get less angry. That for me is what's miraculous, that he actually realized he could get less angry. Whereas actually you tend to think if you're innocent, it's good to be angry and you're right to be angry. And what do you mean I should change? That for me was the miracle for both of them. They both decided they could try and lessen their own pain. That's the point I'm making here. That's the point I'm making here. That for me, I found that absolutely astonishing. The courage to do that in the face of being accused of murdering 2 police, That's incredible. That's the first step. That's the miracle. Because that's the suffering mostly we have, and it doesn't even occur to us. There might be methods for me to be less angry. I'm just so obsessed that he has to change. That's our worst nightmare of suffering. And look at our ordinary lives. Forget about being on death row, And now they are these dear, dear, good human beings helping other people, Unbelievable.
It made me cry.
That's right, exactly.
Total wisdom.
Absolutely.
Total compassion.
Yes, absolutely. They were extraordinary, weren't they? 70-something, both of them now. Just amazing, good human beings, But the real point is, Buddhist, not Buddhist, I don't care. Don't worry about the words, It's the courage to know if you can change it on the outside. Please, if I can ask my boyfriend to stop cheating, aren't I lucky? But we know we can't change everything. And the fact is, Buddha says you can change it, fine, but in the end, change your mind, honey, and it doesn't matter what happens. And this is the point. Then you have far more wisdom, far more courage, and far more compassion for others. Because look at them, these two that are sitting there in their own misery, they're both actually helping others, They're incredible. There's a little property they've got in Cork or somewhere, I forget where it was. Helping other prisoners who've been falsely accused, So amazing. Such kind people. That for me is the point. And I mean, they don't mention the word Buddhism. This is not, you see, again, I keep saying this, Buddha doesn't own this stuff. I would just suggest Buddha is an expert at this, that's all. He really runs with this view to the nth degree, for me. That's the way to say it. So now ask me some questions, come on, if you'd like.
Can I ask one? Do you think meditation can help addicts and alcoholics recover?
So again, let's get clear which kind of meditation you're, because there's a million techniques. So what do you mean by meditation here, in this context? What would you mean by that?
Buddhist meditation, like the shamatha and vipassana.
So a person who's what? So say a kind of person
An addict or an
in the midst of being in the.
No, I mean, who's recovering from their addiction?
This is what I meant when I joked, but I'm serious. When I first became a Buddhist, the idea of sitting down doing concentration was like a joke to me. I didn't even pretend to try. Because it just was absurd. My energy is very intense. And you've got to recognize who you are. There's a million techniques. Buddha taught a million things, but there's something about the West. We're obsessed with this idea of doing concentration. I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm not saying that. But it's like this kind of, we think of it as a magical technique that fixes everything. It's beyond naive to think of it this way. I mean, the Tibetan monasteries, they don't learn to meditate for years, the kids. They study, they learn their stuff, they do their memorizing, they're full of energy, they learn debating. When you get older and you've got a mind that's reasonable, you can start to concentrate. This is an advanced practice of meditation. They learn other things. So but we're just in the West, and I'm not saying you're saying this, there is this real kind of absolute fixed view that meditating, focusing your mind, that's being a Buddhist. So it depends on the person, darling. I wasn't even what's called an alcoholic. But berserk energy, we're all alcoholics to one degree or another. Our minds are all crazy. You've got to know the kind of mind you are. So for me, it was far more beneficial the point of concentration is to focus your mind. Well, you can focus your mind by playing tennis. You can focus your mind by doing the garden. You can focus your mind by washing the dishes. So for me, a person who's got a lot of berserk energy, you utilize your physical energy and you learn to focus. Then you're harnessing your energy. Instead of, you'd explode if you sat down trying to watch your stupid old breath when you've got this berserk mind craving and getting over it, It's too intense. Way too much, I'd say. There's no quick fix about it.
So is there anything in meditation that you think someone who's recovering from addiction could use?
But you see, you keep saying the word meditation. I'm telling you the point. You keep saying meditation as if there's no other method.
Well, no, there are, obviously.
But darling, my point is, when I keep saying it, I'll have to say it again to you. My point is, I didn't sit with my legs crossed and my eyes closed for several years because I thought it was stupid. I didn't need it. It wasn't what I wanted. But that doesn't mean I can't see what's going on in my mind. That doesn't mean I can't learn to take responsibility. That doesn't mean I can't understand what anger and jealousy and depression are and understand attachment. So much of it, if a busy person, a person with a very busy mind, the Buddhist approach is you'd learn Buddhist psychology. You'd learn the meaning. You'd use your intellect to comprehend what is attachment, what is anger at a deeper level. It's intellectually, already it's a revelation. That for me was the revelation. That was the method I used to learn to begin to notice my mind while I'm doing anything. It doesn't have to have you with your eyes closed doing it, is what I'm trying to get at. That's what I'm trying to get at.
So maybe learning about Buddhist psychology could help, if to understand your own mind with that.
Well, could help. What else would you do? If you want to play tennis, it could help to learn theory, is what you're saying. Well, of course, it's a no-brainer. That's certainly the Tibetan approach.
Okay.
That's very much the approach. Learn, because Buddhist psychology is quite precise. But many of us as Buddhists never know that because we don't study it. We just try to be mindful. And it's really not enough, you know. So you've got to know the kind of person you are. So, of course, again, in Tibetan Buddhism, we have another kind of meditation. You see, what's fascinating about the word in Tibet, the word for the verb to meditate is a big surprise to us. It's the verb to familiarize. And that really is kind of completely counterintuitive. I mean, you think of meditation as watching your breath, and I'm not saying you're saying that. So familiarize my mind with the breath? What's that mean, you know? It doesn't even mean it there. The second mode of meditation is called insight or vipassana. So there's a common type of, Buddha taught many insight meditations, this Vipassana word. There's a type in the world that's known as Vipassana, which is one particular kind, which is one of the earlier techniques that Buddha got us to use, which is to help us on the basis of concentration, the first mode, you then develop awareness of the sensations of your body and this and that. And the main reason for him for this method was to help begin to understand how things change, to understand impermanence. There's many of these techniques, but just some have floated down to the current in the popular world, you know. So in this Mahayana view, the Tibetan Buddhist system, the Vajrayana and the Mahayana approach in the Tibetan monastic university system, which is the one where I'm talking from here, the insight meditation, the second mode, is techniques to help you become familiar with the workings of your own mind based on concentration. So what I'm talking about here in a casual way, when you get some concentration every day, basically, let's say you start with a few minutes every morning, what you're learning to do is focus your attention on the breath, let's say. Naturally, inevitably, what you're doing for a few minutes is stepping out of your own head, aren't you? But not in a kind of way like you do it when you're sleeping. When you're trying to sleep, you're just absorbed in it. There's no awareness. But you're stepping out of it and you're trying to get focus. And you're focusing on your breath, let's say. But you can't help but notice your thoughts, can you? Now that's good, that's good. People think, oh, I had a bad meditation, my thoughts are more crazy. But that's good because the point is in your daily life where you're now going to you're going to apply this general idea of the so-called insight or familiarizing your mind with your own mind. So then you're driving the car and because you're practicing, say, learning to focus on your morning session, now you bring that to bear in your daily life, where normally when you're driving the car, the usual mode, before you started focusing meditation, will be you're just absorbed in what's going on, you're noticing the drivers, you're not noticing this, and then the car comes in front and you explode. That's normal because you're not paying attention to underneath, right? But when you start to do concentration every day, even a few minutes, you're training, then you bring that skill to bear in your daily life. So now when you're driving the car, because you're used to stepping out of your own head and not just absorbed mindlessly in what's happening, you're watching the car, but you're also noticing your agitated thoughts and you're chatting away to yourself. You're noticing, well, there's anger, Robina, just be careful, relax about it, it's okay, honey. Then the car comes in front, you won't lose the plot because you're noticing the thoughts here. You're now becoming more familiar. This is a really simple way to put it in ordinary, casual daily life. So when you do serious insight meditation, eventually in Buddhism, it's actually on emptiness, based upon really fierce concentration. It's very advanced, you know. But here, the general idea of becoming familiar with the contents of your own mind is absolutely the real job of being a Buddhist. Are you with me? So for me, in my case, the style of person I am was to sit to try to focus my mind. That was absurd. But I've got an intelligent mind, so I could hear my chatting. I had the wish to be familiar with my own thoughts. I like the idea of noticing and owning my own anger. That's the real one. And then you'll be able to see your crazy mind, your crazy attachment energy, and you'll want to own it. But if you don't have that, it doesn't matter how much meditation you do, it won't help. You've got to have the wish to know that your mind is yours and you can become familiar with it. So learning about what attachment is, what jealousy is, and Buddhist psychology is very precise. That plus the wish to own it, they're the techniques you use as an alcoholic or as a junkie or whatever, and you do whatever you can. But the real shift is to realize this is my thoughts and my mind and I want to become familiar with them. That's the key, I'd say. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And then as you progress, so now I'm able to sit, do different things, whatever. But also the other approach we have, as we know, in Vajrayana, and I would suggest some of these could be quite helpful, but you can do it relaxed, sitting down there. Lots of visualization practices, including mantras. They're proactive, and they can be they're very powerful psychologically. The Buddha, in our tradition, we'd say. You mightn't have much concentration, but if you just think of the Buddha, say a mantra, visualize light coming, purifying, they're very psychological and can be very uplifting. They're great techniques. And they can be very helpful. Even just listening to them can be good for the mind. Because the Buddhist deal is everything that goes on in our mind is important. Do you understand my point? Yeah. So the key is to know that if you're trying to help people, you've got to know their mind and where they're at and what's best for them. But the real point is to know the job isn't to make the thoughts go away, isn't to have an overt feeling of looking calm. It's to become familiar with your own mind and know it's yours and that you can change it.
Okay,
that's the real key. Do you understand my point?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. Anybody else? Questions?
I haven't got a question.
What do you want to say? You want to make a comment?
Well, I've got...
Do you want to give a little teaching, do you?
No.
Oh.
To express gratitude.
Oh, you do? Good, darling.
I could
Yes.
have been in prison.
Okay, there you
My
go.
brothers went to prison.
Wow.
GBA.
Yes, exactly, darling, yes.
And 18 years, even 7 years through that,
Yes.
I forgave my mother for her violence.
Wow.
Brothers,
Well done.
and my suicidal feelings and thoughts
Yes.
started to decline.
Well
get
done.
Less frequent.
Well done.
And I began from that time, about 11 years ago,
Yes.
to feel more gratitude.
Wonderful.
more joy.
That's it. Wonderful.
I still had mood swings.
Of course, that's right. Human.
But
Yes.
something you said
Yes.
was, I think you said it,
Yeah.
maybe not in these words,
Yep.
that you can begin to conceive and feel possibilities beyond
Yeah.
that were never possible.
Yeah, there you go. That's right.
Because I'm an angry child
Yes.
about violence.
I understand.
I know exactly what
There
you're
you go.
talking about.
Yes.
Every word.
I understand.
And I used to think, I am angry.
That's it. That's right, darling. Precisely. That's right.
And then I thought, I'm not in
No.
prison.
No.
I don't have to.
There you go.
I don't even have to. The super sensitivity, the rawness,
Yes,
the
that's
ability
right.
to lash back,
That's
that
it.
started to decline,
Diminish. Well
then
done.
disappear.
Amazing. Well done.
And
No, that's right. And that's the real one is because you opened your mind to the possibility there's more there and then you stopped identifying this is me, That's the one. I mean, that's the thing I found too, when you can start to realize, yes, anger's there, but it's okay, it doesn't define me. It is there. Pay attention to it. It's true. Don't make it go away. Don't blame everybody else, but it's not the whole of me, and that's our big mistake. There's a lovely saying in Christianity, don't criticize the sinner, criticize the sin. That's really powerful. That's very humbling, actually. Yes, anger is there, but the rest of me is fine. And one of the ways the Buddhist psychology talks about all the neurotic states of mind, one of their key functions is they grossly exaggerate. So anger exaggerates the ugliness of the boyfriend, and depression exaggerates the hopelessness of me. I mean, this is how all our delusions, they're all distorted, exaggerated. And so our own internalized anger exaggerates how bad I am. That's the killer. That's what guilt and everything is. They're the killer. It's the exaggerating.
to death.
That's right,
15
exactly.
of my friends did.
That's right, exactly. That's exactly right. No, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. What else, people? Something? Questions? Thoughts?
Is it
Points?
almost like, you're saying like it's like when you identify with the outside world, isn't it? It's like everything that you feel on the inside will reflect on the outside. So if you've got like everybody, it seems in the Western world tries to fix everything on an external.
We do. That's what we do, isn't it? Exactly right. That's exactly right. Yes, it's true.
And it's almost like you could say, because I used to always have a particular perception of life. And
Yes.
it's like I'd identify so much with that.
I understand.
You know what I mean? I'd think I'd make, like was just shared there.
That's right.
I'd like make my all my negativity kind of like part of my identity.
I understand
I'd, like,
exactly.
believe that.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? But like,
Yes.
I kind of realised, and that was all external, and I realised that all this stuff comes from within. The entire world on the outside.
I understand, yes.
Starts in
That's
the mind,
right.
really,
That's exactly right. That's the Buddhist approach. But the other one, what's interesting about this is, the fact is the world is full of intense suffering. Unbelievable, terrible things happen. People do terrible things to each other. It is utterly heartbreaking. So the wisdom wing is sort of putting yourself together to some degree to really understand your own mind and how we can distort what we see. And then when you've got more clarity and more reasonableness, then you can see the world more clearly, and you'll still see the wars and the suffering. It won't all go away as if you've made it all up. But now, because you're more steady and more courageous and more content in yourself, you'll now have more ability to help other people because you know where they're coming from. Because once you know your own mind, join the universe here, and then you can be more helpful to others, much more helpful to others. That's so important. But that's what they say about the mind in Buddhism. It's like the way they say it. They talk about the mind, actually, it's very interesting. They talk about the mind. Lama Yeshe, in a book I've just edited of Lama Yeshe's on Mahamudra, this wonderful meditation technique, and the way they talk about the mind is they say, and of course, this is not how we think of it, because Buddha says our mind is not the brain. Doesn't mean the brain doesn't has a function, but it's a really important point to comprehend. The consciousness is not physical. It goes to more subtle levels. It's not the handiwork of our mummy or daddy or a creator. It's our own. Of course, this implies the Buddhist view we've come from before, but never mind that here. But they say the way the mind consciousness functions, they use the analogy of a mirror. And this is very surprising because we don't think like this. But what you're indicating. Our consciousness, every day we see the world through the senses and our interpretations, right, in the mental consciousness. As they say in Buddhism, the way everything out there appears back to us is in the aspect, as they say, or I'd say, through the lenses of what's in my mind. So it's sort of obvious. If I've got an angry tendency, always finding fault, always critical, always angry, always annoyed, I'll always be seeing trouble everywhere. And so there might be trouble, but my anger makes it a lot worse anyway. And even when it isn't there, I'm going to be seeing it that way, Whereas, if a person has more kindness or more compassion or more empathy, they're still going to see war in Syria. It doesn't make it all go away, but they have a way of interpreting it that doesn't make them crazy, and their heart reaches out. So the way the Buddha's saying is you see, the key thing in Buddhist psychology, and this is very interesting, this is why I really think we've got to study it more, because the words are so familiar, but the meaning Buddhism puts into these words is quite unique to the Buddhist view. This is the business of these emotions, but informed by being conceptual stories, So in the Buddhism, we've got the positive states of mind, which are love, intelligence, kindness, generosity. We know these, and we know if they're prevalent in the day, you're feeling cool, and the world appears reasonable. Even though it's suffering, you see what's going on. The mirror is more clean, if you like. But when the mind is completely overwhelmed by fear or depression or anger or jealousy, despair, low self-esteem, aggression, you name it, the world is like this monster out there. Unbelievable suffering, So the mirror analogy is a really nice one, because what they're saying about these negative states of mind, Buddha says they've got two main functions. One is, and this is, we know it, they're really disturbing. They're actually referred to as like disturbing emotions, like afflictions, they call them. That they're very disturbing, and that's immediately evident to us, Your mind's very disturbed when you're angry. You're very disturbed when you're jealous. It's kind of clear. So, but the other characteristic, which is the unique one for the Buddha, and I find this crucial to understand, is indicated by the word delusion. When if someone calls you delusional, you'd be really offended, because you know that they're accusing you of not being in touch with reality. Now that is exactly what Buddha's saying. So the extent to which I am angry is the extent to which, one, I am disturbed, but two, that person appears like a monster to my eyes. And the anger is what's causing the person to appear like a monster. Maybe I didn't make up the fact that person didn't kill my sister. That person did kill my sister. But we conflate those two. We can't distinguish between the fact that person killed my sister and the fact that he appears like a monster to me. We assume he is a monster. But his mother doesn't see him as a monster, and she knows he's killed my sister too. So this is the point the Buddha's saying. Things appear out there too, as through the filter of our mirror. So when our mirror is completely distorted by the delusions, then the world is like hell on earth out there. And then but the tragedy is, bad enough, as the way Lama Zopa puts it, that stuff appears back to us through our own distorted mirror. But we don't realize it's our mind causing it to look like that. We believe it is like that. And that's the killer. That's the killer. Then there's no chance of change. We just go mad, you know. And this is the world. This is the suffering of the world. And Buddha says it's coming from our minds, the way we see things. So it's quite a tricky point, but it's really precise and very clear. And this is why, if we're serious Buddhists, we should try and study this model of the mind. And this came from these Indians hundreds of years before Buddha. And do you know where they learned it? Internally. They mapped the mind internally. It's utterly fascinating, that. Utterly fascinating. Are we communicating? Any questions? Any more questions? Yes. What, sweetie pie?
Do you practice Hinduism at all?
Well, darling, no, because, you know, Buddha came out of the Hindu. And I think there's so many things that would be similar. So many things would be similar, but I call it Buddhism, you know, because Buddha diverged in his own direction, coming out of the extraordinary tradition. So all the views about karma, that's all shared by the Hindus. There are interpretations that are obviously quite different.
And what are your thoughts about karma?
Well, I mean,
What does Buddha teach?
I understand, yeah, I understand. Let's talk about it then. Yeah, Buddha, his view, his observation. Remember, Buddhism isn't revelation because he's not a creator. And this is a very important point, by the way, because, you know, when I was a Catholic, naturally, God is the boss. God creates the universe. God is the source of the universe. God creates the laws, creates the rules. And like my priest friend told me when I asked him, a sin by definition is doing what God said not to do. So that's the view of morality we have, that it's information from on high. And I'm not criticizing. Please, be a Christian, be a Muslim, have faith in God. I mean, that's what your job would be. That's perfect, but it's not the Buddha's view. He's not a creator. He didn't create any universes. He says we do fine on our own, and that's where this business of karma comes in. So to understand this idea of karma, which is the philosophy that Buddha says is the law, so he calls it a natural law that runs the universe. This law of karma, he says, is the way, it's his way of observing, that he has observed, and he interprets the way the world works, and he calls it this law of karma. So for the Buddha, it isn't from revelation. He's not making it up. He's not speculating, and he's not asking us to believe him. He says all this is provable from our own hard work. So what he says is this. There are trillions and trillions and trillions of consciousnesses or minds. The way they use word and consciousness and mind are used effectively the same way in Buddhism. And think of it like a river of mental moments, you know. If we had perfect memory, we could track ourselves back to our first second in our mummy's womb, couldn't we? So there's our body. So if you think of where your body came from, the Buddha would agree, mummy and daddy got their egg and sperm together. Thank you very much. But your consciousness, Buddha says, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your unconscious, your subconscious, your instinct, all this inner part of who you are, this for the Buddha does not come from your mummy and daddy. It's not a function of your genes, your DNA, your brain. They're indicators of what goes on. There's no argument there. But they're not actually your consciousness itself. Equally, Buddha does not assert a creator, that some creator gave you a soul or a spirit. Buddha doesn't say that. He would say all this consciousness of yours, all the potentials of all these thoughts and feelings and emotions that is you, you can track this back to a moment before conception, and a few weeks before that it was in another body, and before that. Buddha says consciousnesses are beginningless, which is an insane idea to our world, and also will carry on after you die. So the Buddha's deal is, roughly speaking, and it's similar to the Hindu, I suppose, but in many ways very different interpretations, that every millisecond of what we think and do and say programs our consciousness, sows seeds in our consciousness. Whatever we do, whether it's, whatever we think and do and say, is the main cause of what we put into our mind. And though everything we think and do and say programs our mind or leaves seeds in our mind that won't go astray, and that eventually in the future will ripen as our future rebirths, as our tendencies, as our experiences. I mean, it's highly complex, the actual workings of it, but this is the essential principle. And so for the Buddha then, from the big picture point of view in Buddhism, the experiential implication of this is definitely that our mind is ours. We came into this life, he says, fully programmed from the first second of conception. It is absolutely not from our parents. They play a massive role, but that's where the major, I'd say, philosophical distinguishing feature of the materialist explanations and the Buddhist one, and indeed the opposite, the Christian view is another one altogether. They're quite different views. So Buddha says Dalai Lama said one time, karma's like self-creation. Everything we think and do and say does not go astray, sows seeds in our mind that brings our results. So we are literally, in a long-term sense, the creators of ourselves, the Buddhist view would say. So what comes from this philosophy alone is a powerful sense of ownership. You're not blaming other people. You're not this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. The Buddha would say there's logic to all this. There's logic to why things happen. He says this is a natural law that runs the universe and no one runs it. Therefore, it's not punishment. It's not reward. It's a very shocking view if we look at it in great depth. And it's not some cosmic hippie idea. It's dealt with an immense subtlety and depth in the literature. And it's back before Buddha too, this view. And this is the observation of these great beings. So it's a very different view, you know. Do you understand? Okay. Yeah.
So this consciousness that you're talking about,
Yes.
this is not self though, is it? Because Buddhism...
No, I understand. This gets very tricky, yeah. Okay. On a conventional level, you know, there's different kinds. I mean, when you start to look into the more deep, this is where Buddha diverged from the Hindus actually, directly in relation to his own observations about the very nature of self. I mean, the Hindu one, there are these amazing beings who did so much work internally, and they got to the conclusion there is this subtle essence of us that they call Atma, the Christians would call soul, that is not cause, it's got particular characteristics. Buddha says, he suggests his own experiential findings are there is no such thing. So there are all this discussion about no self. And there's many interpretations in many of the Buddhist schools of thought, and it's quite nuanced, you know. But the essence of what he's saying isn't that there's no self, but there's no inherent or independent self. There's no permanent, unchanging, essential little essence called self. So it's a really subtle point. There is a self. Conventionally, you're labelled a self. That's labelled a chair. That's labelled a step or whatever. You got to, you know, when Buddhism discusses all these teachings about how things do exist, about emptiness, you've got to first establish conventionally this is this and this is that. So, you know, there's a cushion, that's a cup. So then we can look into how cups exist, how things exist. Well, we're examples of a type of phenomenon called a person or a self or I. These words are synonymous. So conventionally, you're a person. There is a self. So the word self in the long term does refer, if anything, it does refer to this continuity of consciousness. But you won't find an inherent, intrinsic, inherent, essential, unchanging self. That's the point. Do you see? Yeah. Yes.
Could you describe it as something like a hologram?
You better tell me about a hologram. I don't know. What's a hologram? I know the word. What's it mean?
It's like a projection. Like if you imagine you go to the cinema and there's a film,
Yes.
the light goes through a set of still pictures actually.
Yes, it does.
Still pictures going very fast.
It does, yes.
It goes through and you see the film, you're watching the film. It's
Yes.
like it's really happening in front of you. Okay? And if it's a 3D film,
Yes.
then it looks as if it's three-dimensional.
Oh, okay, so if you're saying that everything, okay, yeah, you can say that's a good analogy. It's a good analogy because the real, no, all of this. So if you basically what you're saying, one way you're saying it is, if we analyse all the components that come together, it's a dependent arising. This movie is a dependent arising. You put this and this and this and this, get a light, get this, you get these quick images, and then it gives the illusion of this moving story. But there's no inherent a moving story in there. Well, there's a way of saying it's a good. Well, it's not a bad analogy. We've got to know what we're saying though to say that.
But it's
Got to.
it is, but you've got the light projecting.
No, I know, but they're just the example. That's just an example. But you got to say it's. Yeah, but you've got to understand what you're saying when you say that. It's easier to say it, but then what? Like, who cares, you know? It's like a hologram. Who cares? Big deal. You've got to know what to think about it when you say it. You've got to have the implication of it. You've got to know what he's meaning by it all to understand, to unpack that and get the appropriate conclusion from it. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. The conclusion from this, therefore, for you is, what's the conclusion from this? The conclusion?
Okay, so the light...
Yeah, never mind, that's not the point. What's your conclusion from this hologram? What's the conclusion Buddha wants you to get to from this observation?
From the hologram.
Yeah, what's the conclusion?
The conclusion is
That's the point now.
Okay, right. Give me a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Just need to think about it.
Okay, good.
A second. So, you've got a light. Oh yeah, I use the film as an analogy because a 3D film is, I think, a good analogy. Okay, can I explain what I mean by that?
Go on.
Okay. So if you go to the cinema, the light is projected. Well, not if you think of an old-fashioned, real, not DVDs and stuff, but where it was projected. Do you follow me?
I do, darling. I want your conclusion, because this is the point. What you're doing is giving an analogy for how things exist. Agree, but now, therefore, what? What does Buddha want you to get from this? What's the conclusion? What's the realization from this? This is the point.
Okay. Therefore, what you're seeing in front of you looks very, very real,
And?
but it doesn't really exist.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay?
So Buddha would say, be slightly more nuanced.
Yeah.
Everything, it's still this is meaningless unless we understand it.
Yeah.
It still sounds cute.
Yeah.
So there's nothing inherent in anything. The way Buddha would say it is there's nothing in anything that doesn't come into existence in dependence upon causes and conditions and various other phenomena. So there's nothing intrinsic in anything. There's nothing set in stone. There's nothing concrete. So those words, or even this, nothing exists as it appears. Another way they say it. But this is all very nice and go, oh, lovely, lovely, oh, that's wonderful. Then what? Who cares? So you've got to unpack all this stuff first intellectually and then in meditation.
So then what?
Well, that's the point. Then what? The Buddha would say, you get realization there's no inherent thing, and then you'll cut ego and you'll become enlightened. So that's the real then what. We've got to know we've got to know how to put it together.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay.
So if can I keep going with that?
No, there's no more to go. We've done it.
No, we haven't.
We have. We got enlightened. When you've realized there's nothing inherent there, when you realize it's not existing as it appears, then you realize there's no inherent thing. Therefore, you cut the ego, and then you keep practicing and working on it, and you achieve your nirvana. That's the conclusion, darling.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, that's what I meant before. I said, so that's where to go.
Yeah,
And then you add the compassion wing to the mix, and you become a Buddha now, even better. Then you can help others.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Spot on.
Good. Who else then? Anybody else? People? You people? What time are we supposed to go home? I mean, I'm not rushing or anything. I'm just curious.
I put 8:30, but if you want to finish at 8.
What time is it? 8. 10 to 8. No, as long as, I won't do a Lama Zopa on you, keep you till 3 in the morning. Come on, people. Any questions?
I was just thinking about what you said about some people internalise anger and some people
Yes.
sour.
Express it out. That's right.
And I really internalise
Oh, okay,
it,
darling.
and it kind of eats me all up.
Yes.
Does that change with the conscious stream as well over time? Or,
What do you mean change?
well, if you're an internaliser in one life, is that likely to
Oh, I see. No, darling. Put it this way. We've all got, Buddhist psychology is, it really actually was interesting. When you study Buddhist psychology, they say there's like 72,000 different states of mind. Well, they narrow it down to like 50 in which you study the text, right? And then even then you can narrow it down to a half a dozen. And even understanding a half a dozen, we can really get great insight into the craziness of human beings. And he also says it applies to the animals as well. So in this little model of mind for the Buddha, you've got 3 categories of states of mind. You got the rubbish ones, the ego ones, the disturbing ones, the neurotic ones, the rubbish that he says we can get rid of, because they're the cause of all the suffering, which is very nice to know you can get rid of them. The second lot, they're called negative, if you like, or disturbing, or delusional. And they're the anger, the jealousy, this stuff. We know so intimately and well. They're so normal for us. So then they've got the positive ones. Love, compassion, intelligence. We know that lot. The third lot are like the mechanics of the mind. And they call them, in Buddhism, and these are really powerful, these are developed in concentration meditation, attention, concentration, good memory. There's lots of these, and they're like the mechanics of your mind. And anybody, whether you're a sniper or a meditator, you need good concentration, right? So these aren't good or bad in their nature, but they're really necessary to function as a reasonable person, whatever you're going to do. So they're very important to understand. So the key ones, though, are the rubbish ones and the good ones. So any happiness we have, any reasonableness that we have, they're due to our good ones. So if they're more prevalent in our life, we'll be okay. We'll be flexible, we'll be able to change, we'll know we've got the rubbish, but we won't be too berserk. We won't blame too many people, won't go crazy, or won't get too depressed. But if the other stuff's there, and they can manifest in different ways, so there's like a hierarchy, I like to say it this way. In the negative ones, there's like a hierarchy of these, and there's very specific ways they describe these in Buddhist psychology. So the root delusion, and we're indicating this in our discussion about the self business, they call it the root delusion, but it's known colloquially as ego grasping. It's this primordially, deeply held, utterly instinctive, way beyond conception, and even not even posited in our culture as any problem. It's this powerful, primordial, fear-based sense of a ridiculous, separate, lonely, bereft, nothing I. It's kind of the irony of self is that ends up, it's panic-stricken. It's just constantly there. And the only time it wakes up is when someone attacks you or offends you or insults you. Then the I rises like a sleeping lion, you know. And so then the ego grasping is this one, really primordial. And that's why in the long term, this is the one we've got to uproot. And you can only uproot this when you've got this single point of concentration because it's so subtle, it's hard to recognize it. Do you understand? So then on the basis of that ego grasping, this primordial sense of a miserable, separate, lonely, bereft, unhappy me, fear-based, then you've got this craving attachment to get what that supposed me wants every millisecond. So this is the one that effectively in Buddha's teachings they say is the main cause of our suffering day to day. And it's called attachment. That's a big shock to us because we use it as a good word. So chuck out our definition. We've got to understand what Buddha means by it, and you'll recognise it if I tell you its particular characteristics. This effectively is what runs the show day to day. It's this deeply held, first of all, it's this, on the basis of the sense of an I, there's this frantic feeling of dissatisfaction, never having enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. Always, it's like always the glass is half full. I've never got enough. I never achieve enough. No matter how thin I get, it's never thin enough. How much food I get, never enough. How much boyfriend tells me he loves me, never enough. No matter how much you achieve, never enough. It's a bottomless pit of never enough, of dissatisfaction. That's the deepest energy of this attachment. So naturally, the next level of it is this hankering for something, and the first level of this hankering is the objects of the senses. The hankering for something out there that for sure, believing when I get it, it'll fill up the gaping hole. This is the gross obvious level of attachment of junkie, of food, you name it, you know. This is attachment energy for the Buddha. Then the next level of attachment, because there's this hankering and this craving for something, and then when you get the object, there's all this expectation and the manipulation to get it. And then what it does is makes this attachment, all this attachment energy, it makes the object look totally divine. So if I'm in love with my boyfriend, he's like God incarnate, isn't he? He's like totally divine, the most perfect person in the universe, because attachment, being one of these delusions, completely exaggerates. So naturally it triggers very nice feelings, and I now completely exaggerate his function in my happiness. He's going to be the cause of all my happiness for the rest of my life. Now I've found happiness. We will be together till we're 80, and it's all perfect. And it's this fantasy. The mind has gone mad making up this fantasy, completely exaggerating his perfectness, his divineness, and his role in making me happy. And this is all attachment. And then the next level is manipulating him to be this way, and then possessing him as mine. All of this is attachment. So it's hunger, emotional hunger, expectation, possessiveness, control freak, neediness. That's all attachment energy. And this is the main deal. And it's like this motor running every millisecond of the day, so subtle. So luckily we've got our saving grace, our kindness and our love and our compassion, and they temper it. But if you've just got raw attachment, honey, you can see people on this earth who don't have much love and kindness. They're like vampires. They'll eat you up for breakfast and spit you out. That's what attachment causes. So this is why if we are fairly kind, nice people, it's hard to see the attachment because it pollutes our goodness and drags us down. Now, get into your, internalized. In this hierarchy, attachment like this junkie that's frantic to get what I want every second, which means only the nice things. Attachment only wants the nice feelings, the nice smell, the nice taste, the nice words, the nice everything. And it's frantic to get it. So the millisecond it doesn't get it, and that's 1,000 times a day, that is the beginning of the opposite state of mind, which is simply called aversion. So attachment is like, oh, that's nice, and you go towards it. Aversion is, ooh, that's horrible, and go away from it. And there's very, very many variations of this one. Aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, and it is 1,000 times a day. So mild versions of it, polite versions, we all know these, frustrated, annoyed, irritated, upset. And why are you those things? Because attachment just didn't get what it wanted. The red light came instead of the green light. The husband didn't answer me immediately. The car didn't start straight away. I mean, we get upset, annoyed, irritated. Now, strong versions of it, that's anger. Internalized is depression. It's the same state of mind, and it's the response when our little needy, little bottomless pit of little girl in there doesn't get what she wants. And that sounds very cruel, but this is the suffering of attachment. And Buddhism deals with it in very subtle, nuanced levels. And the more we meditate, the more we practice, the more we unpack and unravel our minds, the more deep we're going to see how it goes. So we should be very patient and humble with ourselves. We really begin to understand this one. But the response when it doesn't get what it wants, which is so common throughout the day, ordinary things, and we don't pay attention. So a person who gets depressed, you'd say, doesn't have much volatile anger, but their aversion still comes. But it builds up and goes in and deep until he can't get out of bed one morning. So it's much harder to see in the mind of a person who hasn't got so much volatile aversion, anger. I mean, it's easier to see in a person like me because I explode. Well, hopefully not now, but when I used to. You understand my point? But it's real subtle, this workings of attachment and aversion, and it's like 1,000 times a day. And then on top of that, there's jealousy and arrogance. So even if we understand this lot, this is quite profound. This has quite got a lot of insight. Do you understand? To see the workings of this stuff, you know?
I was interested in what you were saying earlier about when there's a lot of energy, because mine will build and build and build. And
yes.
There's so much energy.
That's right.
I can't sit then. I just need something to do with.
No, that's because we. That's see you later.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Bye. No, that's really true. That's right, and that's where, because we're not dealing with things, we're not dealing with what's here. We're just dealing with out there. So of course, if you're never paying attention to this, it's got to explode somehow. Got to come out by depression. Look at it. And so this is why we assume it's normal when you get depressed or get angry. But it's because the problem is we don't pay attention to it. So when we start to pay attention to it, then you can deal with it before it becomes a drama. So if I'm really working on my mind, with my anger, let's say, with my jealousy with my boyfriend, let's say, and I'm really working on my mind, which means already I'm owning that it's my jealousy, not just buying into my story about him cheating on me. And I'm panicking and struggling with it. So I'm dealing with it, talking myself through it, which is being your own therapist. And by the time he comes home, I'm ready for it. I'm going to check the truth, the facts, wait for the facts, and then maybe there's no problem at all. So you're working with yourself. But if you're never paying attention to it, you can't hear it, you can't see it, and it's got to come out somehow. No wonder we're all so neurotic, you know, because we just don't pay attention till it's too late. Yeah. But it's hard work. It's hard work. But we've got to have courage to do it, because it is our mind, and we've got to be brave to see it, not just wish it would all go away, and slowly know we can handle it, we can work with it, that it's not impossible. And that's the real courage we have to get. But it's really a long-term job. Are we communicating, people? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other points? Questions? Maybe enough. Time to go home. Yes, sweetheart.
Quick question. How long have you been a Buddha? How long have you been Buddha?
Buddhist?
Yeah,
Oh, a long time. A Buddha. I'm not a Buddha yet. No, I'm not. She did, I know.
You can get there slowly.
No, darling, no. I mean, I'm old. I'm 73 now, so I've been a Buddhist for 41 years. 42 years.
You don't look 70.
Well, never mind what I am, whatever I am. I was sort of 70. My 70 was not quite true. I'm Sagittarius. I'm 70 this year, 73. But I've been a Buddhist since I'm 31, 32. 40 years, 41 years. So slowly. I'm enjoying the process. I'm enjoying myself. You understand? And the thing is, I mean, yeah, I can say definitely, anyway, whatever. I like Buddha's view. I'm working with it. I use it as my working hypothesis, is the way I say it. Trying to put my money where my mouth is. Do you say that in England? We say it in Australia. Put my money where my mouth is. Doing my best. Yeah, good, darling. Some hand in the back there. Who was it? Yes, sweetheart.
Do you regret that you started becoming a Buddhist at 32, or would you?
What should I regret?
Was it too
Too late for what?
No, like some people say, if I discovered it before.
If I did what before?
Discover.
Oh, I see. No, there's no point in thinking that. Whatever. It came at that time, didn't it? No, not regret. No, I mean, you know, you kind of bring whatever you do with your life, and it leads to that, doesn't it? I mean, you know. No problems. That's okay.
So
Yeah. Yes. What, sweetheart? Go.
why did you become Buddhist?
Well, first I was a Catholic. And I always thought about God and loved Our Lady and loved the saints and all that kind of thing. But I was naughty at the same time. I was very rebellious, always naughty. But I always used to think about these things, the meaning of life and who is God, and God is everywhere. I mean, I go to mass every morning. I wanted to be a nun. Well, I wanted to be a priest first when I was a little girl. It was my job, you know. So now I'm going to be a priest. And they all laughed at me, of course. Got to be a nun, they said. So then I was about 12. I was on my knees begging my mother to let me be a nun like this great saint, Saint Therese of Lisieux. And I cried when she said no. But then 20 years later, when I decided to become a Buddhist nun, she cried. In the intervening 20 years, you know, I was a Catholic and started to think about the meaning of things. And then my mother was a musician. I was studying classical singing. And then I remember I was about 15, and I was brought up in Melbourne, you know, white Australia. I mean, I saw maybe a non-white English person occasionally. Australia started letting in foreigners. They wanted all the English, you know, first, and they tried to chuck out all the Aborigines and tried to chuck out all the Asians. And then at the war, they started letting in the non-English, or with white. This is really serious, Australia, with white skin and blue eyes. They were all the Ukrainians, and they let the Nazis in. It was so funny because they were white, so it was okay. Then they started degenerating, letting in the Italians and the Greeks, the Southern Europeans, and now they're completely degenerated. Now you've got the Vietnamese and every imaginable culture, and Indians and Somalians. So it's a big hot pot, you know. I'm being sarcastic, but whatever. So I didn't meet I didn't even meet non-Catholics. I remember there was a girl at our school, her name was Feinberg. We heard she was Jewish. I mean, I knew only Catholics, you know. So when I was 15, I heard a record of Billie Holiday and Miles Davis. And that opened my mind to sort of, I'm a jazz fan, right? So that opened my mind hugely. I always read, you know. So I started looking about black American suffering and all this black jazz and everything. That opened me up. By the time I was 19, it was 60, so it was time for goodbye God, hello boys. So I gave up God, got into boys and sex and more jazz. And then came to London when I was 23, 1967. And it was like ripe and ready for revolution. Then hippie gradually became kind of radical lefty, looking for that way of understanding the world, and all demonstrating and getting arrested on Fleet Street and everything. And then got arrested during that big Irish demonstration in 1971, I think it was. Remember the Bloody Sunday demonstration in Fleet Street? I got arrested then. I wanted to go to prison. In Holloway, I wanted to be all noble and go to prison when they arrested me, but my sister paid the fine. I was most upset. £30 fine. And then I think gradually that radical lefty then went into sort of radical black politics, and the group in London supporting the Black Panthers in America. And that moved into being a feminist, and then a radical feminist. I became a really serious feminist. And by that time I'd exhausted all, and I'm serious, I'd exhausted all options for who to blame for the world suffering. And then I bumped into these Buddhists, these Tibetans, when I was then I did martial arts, okay? I really like martial arts. And then I bumped into these lamas, these Tibetans, when I was about 31. And they suggested I should start looking at the mind, at my mind. And that was a brand new idea for me. I'd never thought of looking at my mind. Well, that's what I've been doing the last 40-something years. So that's my evolution. Trying to find the way the world is. I always like the big picture and why the world, why happiness, why suffering. Everyone's very different. I mean, many people who are Buddhists just like to meditate, to be mindful. I just like the big picture. So I like the Buddhist approach to life and the whole philosophical approach. I sort of say that's my working hypothesis these days. Trying to use it, you know. Do you understand? That's my answer. You had a question, sweetheart?
I just wondered what your thoughts are on another negative emotion.
A little bit louder.
I wondered what your thoughts were on another negative emotion, guilt. You talked about jealousy.
Yes, darling, guilt. I mentioned it before. Guilt is another version of aversion. And it's anger, but except we're the object. And it's very deep and spontaneous in most of us, isn't it? It's kind of the irony of ego, the way Buddhism says, that somehow, if we think about it, okay, I mean, we have this practice we do at the end of every day, and we call it, it's like these 4 little steps, psychological steps you go through. And the first step is you regret something you've done wrong, but the reason, and then someone asked the Dalai Lama, what's the difference between what he means by this regret, and I'll explain it, and guilt. And he said, well, regret is this attitude. You see, the Buddha's idea about karma is, the very first level of practice is that he says, due to our own past actions, we have happiness, and due to our own past actions, we have suffering. So both. It's like your life is your garden, and the weeds and the flowers, you planted them both, you know. But somehow we tend to focus on the weeds. So we have all this self-hate and stuff. So the Dalai Lama said, the first step, not here, this is a typical Buddhist practice. We regret the things we've done wrong to harm others. Because the first step is because why? Because I've just sowed seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as my suffering. And guess what? I'm sick of suffering. So this step is like compassion for yourself. Do you understand? It's like if you eat too much sugar, you know you regret it because you don't want diabetes. You don't regret it because you feel guilty. That's absurd, you know. So regret, he said, regret, you look in the past and you say, well, I did do this and I cheated on my boyfriend and I kicked the dog, and then guilt. And then you say, the second part of that is, I did this, I did that, I did this, and then you say, I'm a bad person. Now that's guilt, and we wallow in that. We're overwhelmed by that, and it's real suffering. So if you analyze that before I say what regret is, what's anger? You think about it. He did this. You look in the past. You did this and you did that and you did this, and you're a bad person. So it's exactly the same as anger, but we are the object instead of someone else. And we run to it automatically. It's kind of bizarre how we do. It's just old habit, Buddha says. So this regret attitude, he said, the Dalai Lama said, the first part of regret is just the same. You say, I did do this, I did kick the dog, I did cheat on my boyfriend. But then with optimism, you realize it's not set in stone. You now say, because you don't want the future suffering that it causes you, what can I do to change? It's a very wholesome attitude. So we've got to really practice that. So we've got to own responsibility. We do bad. We're not saints. We do dumb things. But the courage, the attitude is you own that you did it, but then you say, how can I fix it? How can I change it? What can I do about it? Rather than just beat ourselves up mercilessly. Because the real point about guilt is no benefit. It's like being angry all the time. There's no benefit. Nothing comes from it. It's just you just get more and more miserable, and there's no conclusion to it. Whereas if you say, I did do it, but how can I fix it? How can I change? That's much more powerful and more kind to ourselves, you know, and more realistic because there's nothing set in stone. But guilt is very deep for most of us. It's kind of the irony of ego.
I think sometimes it's compounded by the fact that you might have other people in your life that you're trying to get rid of the guilt. But they're sort of,
I think, yes. So I got a feeling, we look at guilt in more depth. One of our main attachments, and this is really quite subtle, the grosser level of our attachment is just to get nice things and get pleasant comfort and good sounds and good smells. But the deeper level of attachment, since we're tiny, is we are always craving to be seen as a good girl. So we've been trying to please mummy and daddy and the world since we're tiny, because if we do the right thing according to the world, we'll get praise and we'll be rewarded in a sense. So then when we do something naughty, we've internalized mummy, internalized daddy, and then we beat ourselves up because we won't be approved of. But it's ourselves not approving of ourselves. We've kind of programmed ourselves with this ridiculous thing. So it's just not helpful, you know. And we're always worried about what other people think. Because mummy told us when we're little girls, I mean, even just think about when you're just doing the dishes and you drop a cup. Immediately. It was almost as if mummy's there. Oh, I'm not supposed to drop a cup. I'm a naughty person. Well, excuse me. Drop another cup. It's all right. You're a human being. You understand? So it's a very tricky one, this. It's very subtle, very deep in us. And that's why in the Buddhist view, we've got to learn ever more clearly to listen more carefully, deeper, to unpack and unravel all these instinctive, virtually emotions, but at the level of assumption. We've got to unpack them, you know, and question them. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Just going back to the guilt question, I guess, what kind of viewpoint do we have on feeling guilty about something that happened to you in your past?
Start again. Say it again. I missed you.
Feeling guilty over something that happened to you years ago that you had no control over whatsoever.
You mean a naughty thing, a bad thing that some abuse. It is, I think this is utterly fascinating that we should have guilt about it, isn't it? It's very common, isn't it? Especially something like sexual abuse. It's utterly fascinating that the victim of an abuse thinks they're the blame. It's very that is what you're talking about, right? It is very, very, very fascinating. And I think it has to be something like sex, because, like especially sex. I mean, if someone beats you up, I don't think we feel guilty. If someone, steals your money, I don't think you feel guilty. But I think it's when it comes to something that we have so much emotion and fear about that somehow it's very fascinating to me that we tend to think it's our fault. I've heard this is very not uncommon, Yes.
I think a better word for that would be shame.
Well, I'm not sure. We've got to look into it. I think it's true, and we've got to even analyse and define those words, I think, before we even... Because if someone harms us, but it has to be a lot to do with our deep cultural instinctive feelings about the shame, the guilt about sex, It's not... If someone beats you, you don't feel guilty. I don't think if someone beats you up, you don't feel guilty. I don't think so. I find it very fascinating that.
But if you're...
Hang on.
If you're a child and it's an adult who's abusing you...
You mean sexually?
Yeah. Or
Then?
Parents...
But not just... I'm getting at is the fact that it's sex, that we have guilt. That's my point here.
It is because you feel the pleasure.
That's what I agree with. There you go. That's the point. There is the pleasure, and then there's this enormous guilt.
Say a bit more about
But
that.
never mind. But let's keep it on track, though. I mean, please.
You're telling me what's on track and what isn't.
I'm telling you Buddha's view. I can only do that, darling.
Could I finish what I was going to
If you want to give your view, I'm very happy to hear your view. But all I can... Please, I beg you. No, that's fine. But all I'm telling you here... Okay, I don't want to... Okay, we won't go into this. It's too difficult then. Because all I'm trying to do, by understanding what I know about Buddhist psychology, the only answer I can give, I have to be authentic in giving you a Buddhist answer. So everybody in the room might have a different answer, and that's really fine. So do not take me...
I don't think...
Please, for a second, you please let me finish. I beg you, please. No, I want to stop you because I want to talk here. I want to stop you for a moment. No, I don't want to hear it for the moment. Do you mind? I'm running the show. Please, you've got to understand me. Don't think I'm being aggressive. I beg you. I need you to stop for a moment. I do need you to stop for a moment. Please, I beg you. I will tell you in a second, and then I would like to hear, if you want to discuss this, open this minefield, if it's beneficial.
I don't think it's a minefield.
Oh my God, please, I have to tell you this. I beg you. I want you to hear this.
Yeah.
She asked me a question. She asked me a question.
Okay.
And my job here, sitting on this chair, is to give, to the best of my ability, authentic Buddhist explanation about it, to give her a piece of advice. Now, please, I need you to stop because that's my job. And if you want to talk to her privately later, I'd like you to do that. But I want to talk here to her. So do you mind? I don't want to hear more from you. No.
Making the assumption that what I'm saying is...
But I don't need to hear what you have to say at this moment because it's my job to help her right now. I'd like to help her. Well, you talk privately later, sweetheart. It's not a discussion.
Pardon?
This is not a discussion. You've got to not misunderstand me here. I'm sounding very aggressive, I know, but please try to hear the point. This is my job in this room at this moment to give her an answer. And if you would like to have a private talk later, I would, because there's no time to have a deep discussion because it's a pretty intense topic. I don't think there's time. I don't need to hear what you have to say. I don't want to hear it. I'd like you to tell her later, darling.
Take me 1 minute.
No, thank you very much. I prefer you talk to her later, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. So I'll just... Sweetheart, I forget your name. What's her name? I forget her name.
Me.
No, not you, her. What's your name, darling? I can't hear.
Sorry, Fern.
That's it, of course, Fern, I remember now. So Fern, darling, let me just tell you my understanding of the Buddhist explanation of this, based on this Buddhist understanding of the way attachment works and ego grasping works, which then gives rise to aversion, which is guilt in one aspect, or aggression, or depression, you understand, or all of these, based on my understanding. And you're very welcome if you'd want other people's advice to get it after the teaching. I'm more than happy with that. Of course I am. I think it's linked to the same thing we were discussing here, that the deepest attachment we've got, I think the deepest attachment we've got, which is really subtle, and I think we don't see this until we really start to practice. This is what all the lamas would say. This is a quite advanced level of practice. When we look at the attachment, the craving to be approved of, the craving to be seen as a good girl, You know, the craving to do the right thing because we want people to approve of us. This is the deepest, deepest, deepest of attachment. And my sense is this is linked to that because we're doing something that's so, and I think, remember, we have to factor in karma because karma, Buddha would assert, we don't come fresh into this world. We come with ancient, ancient, ancient habits. And the habit, the attachment to sex is the cause of why we even have a human body. The Buddhist view of the evolution of even this planet, the evolution of a human life is due completely to sexual attachment. It's such a profoundly deep attachment, right? So it's programmed in us from countless lives, and I think this plays a massive role in it, and that would not be in modern psychology because there's no concept like that. Do you understand? So, and then the second part is because I think, especially if it's a family, let's say it's family, then there's intense karmic connection between that person, you know, and let's say ourself if it happens to us. So there's all this as part of it that informs it, you know. And then, and I think your point is really excellent because if we analyse, you know, the attachment is a junkie that wants pleasure. That's it. The Buddhist analysis of we have only pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. It's a very specific mental function in Buddhist psychology. It's not how we think in our world. And attachment's job is to get pleasant feelings every millisecond. Every millisecond, that's all it wants. Everything we ever do, it's why we have heroin, why we have sex, why we eat food, why we move our body, why we do this, why we go to sleep, why we eat, why we do anything on this planet, in this body made of the five senses, is to get an object that will trigger a pleasant feeling. So something as intense as sexual contact, which naturally triggers very pleasant feelings, whether you like it or not, then of course the mixture of the past karma, the intensity of the relationship with that person, the craving to be seen as a good girl, and immediately something naughty happens because we're programmed that way. It doesn't matter whether your mother told you. We are programmed from many lives with this view. Then, of course, the pleasure will come. And then, of course, this massive guilt. Massive guilt. It's true. Massive guilt. The assumption you shouldn't be having that pleasure. It's your fault somehow. And that's why many people deny it, isn't it? And so it's just very fascinating. I mean, this is the Buddhist view, and I think the Buddhist view, you can't separate it from the view of karma. This is so massive a thing. That's why we have so much rubbish about sex. It's from countless lives of it, not just this life, you know. I mean, it's just very fascinating, the Buddhist view about, and the fact that sexual attachment is the cause of even having a human body, you know. So it's very deeply ingrained. And I think the attachment to be seen as a good girl. So how naughty to have pleasure. It's such an insightful point you made, you know. So but then when we break, that's why you see with attachment and aversion, attachment is this primordial one. If we can really start to look into our minds, and then we can, this is where with this process of first regretting, the very first step of the four opponent powers, is we look back into the past and we think of something that we did that's negative. Well, in this case, nothing. Something was negative was done to us. But if you have the view of karma, let's say you're a Buddhist, then you might have the concept of a past life. Maybe, you know, that you've got a karmic relationship with this person. If one is brave enough. They'll make these young Tibetan nuns. I always quote these young Tibetan nuns. Never mind that. So we have to look carefully at the action. And if we did do something that's negative, then we regret it. And if we didn't, then we have to just, you know, and then if we do, so okay, we do have the view of karma, that means we have to understand why it happened. And that can help us process it. But it depends on how much of the Buddhist view we're really taking on board. Do you understand? So all of these are the things that you'll bring into your life to help you process. If the karmic one is a really powerful view for you, you could use that. If it's not, you don't use it. But the key one is we have to have this kind of honesty, incredible integrity to look into our mind and own something that if we did something negative, then you own it, regret it. And if we didn't, then you don't have to have regret. But we have to look at the analysis, understanding attachment and understanding guilt. I think the Buddhist view is really quite helpful. Does that make sense, Fern, what I'm saying, darling? But it's really not uncommon, is it? But I think part of the problem, too, is hiding it. This is part of the problem, I think, with negativity. One of the functions of guilt, especially guilt, is we hide it. We want to make it go away. We want to hide it. I mean, the people I know who talk to me and, you know, experience, people live in don't remember it for 50 years maybe, but other people remember it vividly. And I think when we can remember something like that and not be afraid of it and go into it and look at it, that's what takes the fear away. That's what helps us deal with it. Because aversion is what's arising, basically. Attachment only wants nice things, then all this mucky stuff comes, so then aversion arises, and we either get angry or we live in denial of it or become deeply depressed, you know. So I think confronting it and remembering it and not being scared of it, not being afraid of it, that's what completely dissipates it. Can anyway. Do you understand? And that's why all the neuroses we have are all irrational. Guilt is irrational. Attachment's irrational. Anger's irrational from the Buddhist perspective. I mean, from the West, they're normal, but for Buddha, they're totally delusional, distorted states of mind. So having the courage to own them and then to unpack, you know, that's part of the process of being your own therapist, if you like, sweetheart. Do you understand, Fern? Thank you, sweetheart. Excuse me for that. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for persevering with my intensity, but I really, very welcome to talk about it after, but I think not here. Did I upset anybody? Did I shock anybody? And I didn't mean to be offensive to you at all, sweetheart. You, with a you. No offence, truly, truly. Just trying to do my job properly, yeah. Shall we finish this interesting discussion? So my feeling is if there's even 1 millimetre of use here, how marvellous. If there's nothing useful, then it's okay. You're the boss, not Buddha. But if there's anything here, any useful, any tools we can take from all this, then don't give up on it. Keep moving, keep looking, keep checking, keep reading, keep analysing, keep looking. Find tools. Never give up finding tools to develop our amazing potential. Our amazing potential. For our sake and the sake of others. Kewadinyu dudag lama sangye drub gyurne drowa chikyang malupa Dei sala gopashok Jangchob semchog rinpoche ma kye panam ke gyuchig kye panyampa me payang gong ne gong du pabashok. Thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
You were supposed to be having a rest this day, so you know.
Oh, I did. I promise. He's been my mother to me. Took care of me. Took me for
For
food.
those of you who don't know, Venerable Robina spends her whole life actually at the moment touring the world, teaching, and you know, even in her break, you know, she was only here for like 24 hours, and I invited her to come and teach, and she accepted. So really, you have all our thanks for helping us.
It's a pleasure,
Thank
pleasure.
you so
Thank you very
Please
much.
come back.
I will.
Next time
I
around.
promise. There we go. There we go, darling.
Thank
Thank you so much. Thank you. Very kind, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Thank you. All right. Well, I'll just sit here for a minute. You do what you like. I'm going to relax. If you want to come and say hello to me, you're very welcome.
Yeah, if anybody wants to make an offering,
No, just say hello. Just don't worry. I'll sit here for a minute. Drink my tea. Thank you, sweetheart. So we have a quick chat. Talk to me.
No, sorry, I don't really see you as such, but I wanted to say, I
What?
wanted to ask you about Laudo, but I wanted to...
Good, darling. Good, fantastic, yes. What do you mean talking about? Let's just have a chat after. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a very insightful thing you said.